The 10 Daughters. The morning sun painted the New Mexico territory in shades of gold and copper. As I sat on my porch, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. 17 years I'd been alone on this ranch. 17 years since I'd driven the last of my cattle to market and decided that solitude suited me better than the company of men. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust across my land, same as it had every morning for near 2 decades. I was fixing to head inside when I saw them, a line of riders coming up the valley road, their figures wavering in the heat shimmer like spirits rising from the desert floor. At first I counted 5, then 7, then realized there were more still. 10 riders, all told, and as they drew closer I could see they were women, young women, riding with the easy grace of those born to the saddle. My hand drifted to the Colt at my hip, not from any sense of threat, but from habit. A man alone learns to be cautious of unexpected visitors, especially in country where the law was still more suggestion than certainty. They rode into my yard in formation, their horses well bred and well cared for. The women themselves were something to behold, dark-haired beauties with skin kissed bronze by the southwestern sun, dressed in riding clothes that spoke of both practicality and prosperity. The eldest couldn't have been more than 25, the youngest perhaps 16. The leader, a young woman with her mother's bearing and fire in her dark eyes, dismounted with fluid grace. She approached the porch with measured steps, her spurs ringing against the hard-packed earth. "Senor Jack Morrison?" she asked, her English accented but clear. I set down my cup and stood slowly, my joints protesting after too many years of ranch work, and not enough years of easy living. "That's me, and you are?" "My name is Isabella Delgado," she said, removing her hat to reveal hair black as a moonless night. "These are my sisters." I looked past her at the other 9 women, all bearing the same proud bearing, the same dark beauty. "Sisters," she'd said, and I could see the family resemblance strong in each face. "That's quite a family you have there, Miss Delgado. What brings you to my ranch?" Isabella studied me for a long moment, as if taking measure of the man I'd become. Finally she spoke the words that would shatter my carefully constructed solitude. "You loved my mother once." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I gripped the porch railing, feeling suddenly like a man who'd taken a bullet and was only now beginning to understand he'd been shot. "Your mother," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Esperanza Delgado," Isabella said, "though I believe you knew her as Esperanza Morales." The name hit me like a physical blow. Esperanza, hope. I hadn't spoken that name aloud in 17 years, though it had echoed in my dreams more nights than I cared to count. "She's dead," I said, though it came out more as a question than a statement. "See," Isabella nodded. 2 months ago. The fever took her. I sank back into my chair, suddenly feeling every one of my 53 years. "Yes." Esperanza, dead. The woman who had been my whole world for 3 precious years, gone forever. "She spoke of you often," Isabella continued, her voice gentler now, especially near the end. "She told us stories of a gringo cowboy who loved her truly, who treated her like a queen instead of a conquest." "Why are you here?" I asked, though I thought I already knew. "Because before she died she made us promise to find you, to tell you about us." Isabella gestured to her sisters, who had remained mounted but were listening to every word. "To tell you that you had daughters." The words echoed in the afternoon air like the report of a rifle. "Daughters, 10 daughters. All of you?" I asked. "All of us," Isabella confirmed. "Born after you left California. Born after Papa Alejandro married our mother and gave us his name." The memories came flooding back then, as vivid as if they'd happened yesterday instead of nearly 2 decades ago. I'd been working a ranch outside Los Angeles, young and full of fire, when I'd met Esperanza at a church social. She was 17, beautiful as a desert sunrise, and engaged to be married to Alejandro Delgado, a man twice her age but with money and position. What happened between us was the kind of love that poets write about and sensible men avoid. For 3 months we met in secret, stealing moments when we could, dreaming of a future that seemed as distant as the stars. I'd been ready to fight for her, ready to take her away from everything she'd known, when reality crashed down around us. Alejandro discovered our affair. Instead of calling me out as I'd expected, he'd made me an offer, $5,000 to disappear forever, to never contact Esperanza again, to let her marry him with her reputation intact. The alternative, he'd made clear, was a bullet in my back and Esperanza ruined forever. I'd taken the money and ridden east, telling myself I was protecting her. For 17 years I'd told myself that lie. She never forgot you, Isabella said, as if reading my thoughts. Even after 10 children, even after 20 years of marriage to a good man who loved her despite everything, she never forgot the cowboy who made her feel like she could fly. I looked at the 10 young women before me, trying to see myself in their face, there in the set of Isabella's jaw, in the way the second eldest, who looked perhaps 23, sat her horse, in the stubborn lift of chin I recognized in the youngest. What do you want from me? I asked. Nothing, Isabella said simply. We are Delgados. We have land, money, position. We lack for nothing. Then why come here? Why tell me? Because a promise to a dying mother is sacred. Another of the sisters spoke up, the one I'd noticed on horseback. She dismounted and approached the porch. I am Carmen. Our mother made us swear to find you, to let you know that your blood runs in our veins, to tell you that we do not hate you for leaving. She also, said a third sister, remaining mounted but speaking with quiet authority, wanted us to ask if you ever found what you were looking for. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. What I was looking for enough distance to forget her. 17 years, and I still wake up some mornings thinking I hear her voice. Perhaps, Isabella said carefully, that is because forgetting was the wrong goal. The afternoon stretched on as I learned about my daughters. Isabella, the eldest at 24, managed the family's largest ranch. Carmen, 23, had become a skilled healer, trained by the local curandera. Maria, 22, bred horses that were sought after throughout the territory. Dolores, 21, had a gift for numbers and managed the family's financial affairs. The middle sisters, Rosa, Catalina, Esperanza, named for her mother, and Luz, ranged in age from 20 to 18, each with their own talents and dreams. The two youngest, Paloma and Soledad, were 17 and 16 respectively, still finding their places in the world. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, I found myself studying each face, looking for traces of the man I'd been 25 years ago. You're wondering if we're really yours, Dolores observed with a slight smile. The thought had crossed my mind, I admitted. Our mother was many things, Carmen said, but never a liar. If she said you were our father, then you are our father. Besides, added Rosa with a grin that reminded me powerfully of my own sister who died young, look at Paloma's eyes. I looked at the youngest mounted sister, and my breath caught. Her eyes were the pale gray-green of sage, unusual among her dark-eyed sisters. They were my father's eyes, my eyes passed down through generations of Morrison men. Dios mío, I whispered. She also has your stubborn streak, Catalina added with obvious affection for her youngest sister, and your tendency to stare off at distant horizons. As evening approached, I found myself in the strange position of offering hospitality to 10 daughters I'd never known exist. My ranch house was large, built with the optimism of a young man who'd planned on a big family, but it had been just me rattling around in it for so long that the thought of 10 houseguests was overwhelming. We have bedrolls, Isabella assured me, apparently reading my expression. We're accustomed to camping. We've been traveling for 3 weeks to find you. 3 weeks? We started in California, followed rumors and registry books. A man named Jack Morrison, who bought land in New Mexico territory 17 years ago. It took some detective work. As my daughters made camp in my yard, building a fire and preparing a meal with practiced efficiency, I retreated to my porch to think. The solitude I'd cultivated for nearly 2 decades was shattered beyond repair, but I found I wasn't mourning its loss as much as I'd expected. Señor Morrison, it was Esperanza, the 18-year-old who bore her mother's name. She approached the porch hesitantly. Just Jack, I said. I think we're past formalities. She smiled, and I saw her mother in that expression so clearly it made my chest tight. Mama wanted us to give you this. She held out a small wrapped package. With trembling hands I took it and carefully unwrapped the brown paper. Inside was a silver locket I'd given Esperanza during our brief time together. I'd saved for 2 months to buy it, had it engraved with the words, Para mi Esperanza, for my hope. I opened it with careful fingers. On one side was a tiny daguerreotype of Esperanza, as I'd known her, young, radiant, full of dreams. On the other side was a newer photograph showing her surrounded by 10 girls of various ages, my daughters. She wore this every day, young Esperanza said softly. Even after she married Papa Alejandro, he knew about it, but he never asked her to remove it. He was a good man. The best, she said simply. He loved us as if we were his own blood. He never made us feel like strangers in our own home. That night, as I lay in my bed listening to the soft voices of my daughters around their campfire, I thought about the paths that had led us all to this moment. I'd spent 17 years in self-imposed exile, convincing myself that I'd made the only choice possible, but looking at the 10 remarkable women who'd ridden into my life, I wondered if I'd been a coward instead of a hero. The next morning, I woke to the smell of real breakfast eggs and bacon and fresh tortillas that Isabella was making on a griddle over the fire. It had been so long since I'd had a proper meal that I'd almost forgotten what I was missing. We should talk, Isabella said, as I joined them around the fire. About what? About what happens next, Carmen said. We've done what Mama asked. We've found you. We've told you about us. But the question now is whether this is where our story ends. I looked around at their faces, these 10 women who shared my blood but not my history, who'd grown up without me but somehow seemed complete, despite my absence. What do you want to happen next? I asked. We want to know our father, Maria said simply. If you're willing to let us. I'm not sure I know how to be a father to grown women, I said honestly. Perhaps, suggested Luz, you could start by being our friend. Over the following days my daughters stayed on the ranch, and I began to learn who they were. Isabella had her mother's fierce protectiveness but also a business sense that reminded me of my own father. Carmen combined healing skills with a gentle wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. Maria had an intuitive understanding of horses that bordered on mystical. Dolores could calculate figures in her head faster than most men could do it on paper. Rosa had a gift for growing things. She spent hours in my neglected vegetable garden, bringing it back to life with patient care. Catalina was an artist, sketching everything she saw with quick, sure strokes. Young Esperanza was a natural storyteller, keeping her sisters entertained in the evenings with tales both true and imagined. Luz had a musical voice and played a guitar she'd brought in her travel pack. Paloma, despite being the youngest, was perhaps the most practical of them all, fixing things around the ranch that I'd been meaning to get to for years. And Soledad, the second youngest, surprised me most of all. She was quiet, watchful, with an intelligence that seemed to see straight through to the heart of things. You're afraid, she said one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. Of what? Of caring too much, of losing us the way you lost our mother. I looked at this 16-year-old who seemed to understand me better than I understood myself. Smart girl, smart enough to know that some risks are worth taking, she said. Our mother took a risk when she loved you. Yes, it ended in heartbreak, but look what came of. She gestured toward her sisters. Would you undo that? Would you wish us a way to spare yourself the pain of losing our mother? Never, I said immediately. Then perhaps you can find the courage to risk loving your daughter. On their 7th day at the ranch, Isabella approached me with a proposition. We need to return to California, she said. There are business matters that require our attention, and our younger sisters need to complete their education. I nodded, having expected this moment even as I dreaded it, but she continued. We'd like you to come with us. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Come to California? Meet Papa Alejandro's family. They're your daughter's family too now. See the land where your daughters grew up. Let us show you who we've become. I can't just leave. Why not? Carmen interrupted, approaching from where she'd been tending her horse. What's keeping you here besides stubbornness and old pain? I looked around at the ranch that had been my prison for 17 years. This is my home. No, said Soledad, who'd been listening from the porch. This is your hiding place. Home is where the people you love are. The argument continued for days. My daughters, I learned, had inherited their mother's persuasive powers along with her beauty. They painted pictures of California, of green valleys and successful ranches, of a large extended family that had heard stories about me for years, and was curious to meet the legendary gringo cowboy. Papa Alejandro wants to meet you, Isabella said. He says any man who could inspire such devotion in our mother must be worth knowing. He's not angry? He was, once, Carmen admitted, but 20 years and 10 beloved daughters have a way of healing old wounds. He says that if our mother had married you instead, she might have been happier, but she wouldn't have been his wife, and he wouldn't have had the privilege of raising us. In the end it was young Esperanza who made the argument that swayed me. She's buried in a little cemetery outside Los Angeles, she said one evening, in the shade of an oak tree, with a view of the mountains. She used to say that when she died she wanted to be somewhere she could watch the sunrise. The thought of Esperanza's grave, untended and unvisited by anyone who'd truly known her heart, was unbearable. 3 weeks after 10 strangers had ridden into my yard, I found myself packing my few possessions, and preparing to leave the ranch that had been my world for 17 years. I'd arranged for a neighbor to look after my cattle and maintain the property if California didn't work out. I told myself, I could always come back, but as I looked at my daughters, already mounted and ready for the journey, I knew I wouldn't be returning. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. The ride to California took 2 weeks, and every mile revealed new aspects of my daughters' characters. They were skilled travelers, competent horsewomen, and intelligent companions. They told me stories of their childhood, of the man who'd raised them as his own, of the mother who'd shaped them with her love and wisdom. By the time we reached the outskirts of Los Angeles, I understood that Alejandro Delgado hadn't just been a husband to Esperanza, he'd been her salvation. He'd given her respectability, security, and most importantly, he'd loved her daughters as if they were his own blood. The Delgado ranch was prosperous and well managed, sprawling across a green valley that seemed like paradise after the harsh beauty of New Mexico. And there, waiting on the porch of a grand adobe house, was the man who'd been both my rival and my successor. Alejandro Delgado was 70 now, his hair white, but his bearing still proud. He watched me dismount with curious eyes, then stepped forward and extended his hand. "So," he said in accented English, "you are the famous Jack Morrison." "Just Jack," I said, accepting his handshake. "Just Jack then. I am Alejandro. Welcome to our home." That evening, as I sat at a table surrounded by more family than I'd known since childhood, not just my 10 daughters, but Alejandro's children from his first marriage, grandchildren, cousins and friends, I finally understood what I'd been missing during my 17 years of self-imposed exile. "Tell me about her," I said to Alejandro later when we'd stepped outside for air and privacy. "Tell me about the woman she became." And he did. He told me about Esperanza's strength during difficult pregnancies, her fierce protection of her daughters, her gift for making everyone feel welcome in her home. He told me about her garden, where she grew the most beautiful roses in the valley, and her laughter which could fill a room with joy. "She never stopped loving you," he said finally, "but she learned to love me too, in a different way. She gave me 30 years of marriage, 10 beautiful daughters, and more happiness than one man deserves. I cannot regret the path that brought her to me." The next morning my daughters took me to the cemetery where their mother was buried. The headstone was simple but elegant. Esperanza Delgado, beloved wife and mother. Below it in smaller letters, "She lived with hope, and died with grace." I knelt by the grave and placed a single white rose cut from her own garden on the sun-warmed earth. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I missed watching our daughters grow up. I'm sorry I never got to tell you that leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life." But even as I spoke the words, I knew they weren't entirely true. If I hadn't left, there would have been no marriage to Alejandro, no stable home for my daughters, no chance for Esperanza to become the woman she was meant to be. Sometimes, love means letting go, even when it breaks your heart. I stayed in California for 3 months, getting to know my daughters, and the extended family that had embraced them. I learned about their dreams and aspirations, their triumphs and struggle. I watched Isabella manage a complex business negotiation with skill that would have impressed men twice her age. I saw Carmen heal a sick child with a combination of traditional remedies and intuitive care. I witnessed Maria gentle a wild horse that no one else could approach. But most importantly, I learned to be their father, not the stern patriarch I might have been 20 years ago, but something different, a friend, a confidant, a source of support and encouragement. When it came time to return to New Mexico, because the ranch still needed tending, and I'd discovered I wasn't quite ready to abandon the life I'd built there entirely, I didn't go alone. Paloma and Soledad, the 2 youngest, asked to come with me for an extended visit. "We want to see where our father lives," Paloma said. "We want to understand the man you became in those 17 years, and added Soledad with her characteristic directness. Someone needs to teach you how to cook something besides beans and hardtack. So I returned to my ranch with 2 of my daughters, and for the first time in 17 years the old house felt like a home instead of a hideout. Paloma proved to have a gift for ranch management that rivaled my own, while Soledad transformed my sparse bachelor quarters into something approaching civilization. They stayed for 6 months before returning to California for their sister Isabella's wedding to a young lawyer from San Francisco. I attended the wedding, of course. I wouldn't have missed it for anything. But afterward I returned to New Mexico with a promise to visit again soon and an open invitation for any of my daughters to visit the ranch whenever they wished. Over the following years, they did visit, sometimes singly, sometimes in groups, bringing news and laughter and life to my previously solitary existence. I in turn made regular trips to California, becoming a familiar figure at family gatherings and celebrations. Alejandro and I developed an unlikely friendship, bonded by our shared love for the same woman and the daughters she'd given us both. When he died peacefully in his sleep 5 years after I'd met him, I stood with my daughters at his graveside, and mourned the man who'd been a better father to them than I ever could have been. Now as I write this story I'm 70 years old, and my 10 daughters have given me 26 grandchildren and 8 great-grandchildren. The Morrison Delgado clan, as we jokingly call ourselves, spans 2 states and 3 generations. I still live on my ranch in New Mexico, though it's no longer the lonely outpost it once was. Isabella's youngest son is learning to manage cattle under my guidance. Carmen's daughter has set up a clinic in the nearest town. Maria breeds horses on a spread that adjoins my property, and sometimes, on quiet evenings, when the wind carries the scent of sage across the valley, I sit on my porch and remember that day 23 years ago, when 10 beautiful young women rode into my yard and changed my life forever. The loneliness that defined my middle years seems like a dream now, or perhaps a necessary prelude to the joy that followed. I learned, eventually, that love doesn't diminish when shared, it multiplies, and that sometimes, the greatest gifts come disguised as the words you never expected to hear. You loved my mother once. Yes, I did love their mother. I love her still, but I also love the daughters she gave me, and the life we've built together from the ashes of old regret. It took me 70 years to understand that family isn't just about blood or marriage, or legal documents, it's about the choice to claim each other, to show up, to stay, and in the end that choice made all the difference.